Hey, it's Coach Anderson again from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. We're going to pick up with Lesson 3 on the New Deal. And what we're going to talk about is the second New Deal. Now, we told you that the first part of the first New Deal, of course, were those 15 programs that were enacted during the first 100 days of FDR's presidency. What we're going to talk about now is the second New Deal. The second New Deal will be the nickname given to those groups of programs that were created after the first New Deal kind of runs into some trouble or some opposition from some different parts, of course, of the country and different sectors of the government. What we're going to do, of course, is look at the unit focus question like we always do. Remember, we won't answer this question, but what we'll do is give it to you each time so that it kind of guides your thought process so that you can answer it, of course, at the end. The question says, should government take on the role of provider for its people in times of economic upheaval? And as we go through and talk about these lessons, think about that, of course. The academic vocabulary we have academic and content vocabulary. You should define these terms in your journal. We'll try to address as many of them, of course, as we can as we go through the lesson. Today we have 3 focus questions for the lesson, and we will answer these questions unlike we will, of course, with the unit focus question that is only answered at the end. The first question is, why did FDR create the second New Deal? 2, what challenges did the second New Deal face? 3, what successes did the second New Deal have? Well, we'll start with a do now activity, and the do now activity, of course, this is what taxes might be held out of your check when you are employed by American businesses. We'll give you a few minutes to mull that particular answer over, and we'll come back in a few minutes and we'll talk about what some possible answers could be. Well, Uncle Sam is always going to get his. So whenever you work, of course, and you have to pay taxes in terms of income taxes, and when you look at your check, some of the taxes, of course, that you'll see that come out are going to be things like your federal income taxes, your state income taxes. And I was a grown adult for a long time before I figured out where some of that FICA money, that FICA money, of course, my check, of course, is going to. And FICA or FICA, of course, is going to be insurance money that's taken out of your check, of course, and paid to the government in Social Security. And we will talk about Social Security here in a few moments. FDR faces challenges. Now, most people in the United States of America from 1932 to 1936 absolutely love FDR. The reason why they love FDR is because he seems to be someone that is worried about the common person. And because he's worried about the common person, they believe that FDR, of course, is going to be their savior, or the person, of course, that will see them through these hard economic times. Republicans criticized FDR's New Deal as it spent too much, causing deficit spending. In other words, spending beyond your means. Credit is what got us into this mess in the first place, and a lot of people saw deficit spending, of course, as the government, of course, using credit, giving itself a line of credit, of course, to pay for these programs. Not only did Republicans criticize FDR, but we had Democrats who criticized him and said he wasn't spending enough. So Republicans are saying he's spending too much. Democrats in his own party tell him he's not spending enough. One of the most popular critics of FDR at this particular time was Louisiana Governor Huey P. Long, and then Father Charles Coughlin and Dr. Francis Townsend. So these were 3 people from 3 different walks of life, or 3 different segments of the community or society that were attacking FDR also. Townsend did have a good idea, though, or in mind some people it was a good idea. Since you had so many young people that were unemployed, one of the things that he thought that you should do is to find a way to get older people out of the workforce. And one way that you can get older people out of the workforce is if there were people that were over 60, pay them not to work. We were paying farmers not to farm. Why not pay them not to work? Give them a pension so that it would open up jobs, of course, for younger workers. Over 60, getting a pension? That sounds like something, doesn't it? The Supreme Court declared New Deal programs like the NRA, National Recovery Administration, unconstitutional. And so when we look at FDR's New Deal, of course, is being attacked from all sides. Republicans, Democrats, prominent members of society. So when we look at the U.S. Supreme Court, so when we look at FDR's New Deal, it's under fire. Here's Governor Huey P. Long from the great state of Louisiana. Here's Father Charles Coughlin. And here's Francis Townsend, who, of course, all were critics of FDR. All right, the second New Deal. The shortcomings of the first New Deal was that it garnered support from citizens, but only put a small dent in unemployment. Now you have to understand there were millions of people, of course, that were unemployed. And so the second New Deal, the purpose of it was to increase job creation by creating something called the Works Progress Administration, which employed almost 9 million workers by the beginning of World War II. The WPA program called for Federal Project Number 1. Well, one of the parts of the WPA program was Federal Project Number 1. So even if you were an artist, if you were a musician, an actor, like Orson Welles, who becomes a very big movie producer later, and if you were a person that was more artistically inclined, FDR found places, of course, for you to work also. And that would, of course, be beautification projects where where they were painting pictures or murals on the sides of buildings, or putting on plays in communities, of course, that had never seen plays and stuff like that before. Here's a picture of a WPA project, and you'll notice right here in the middle is Eleanor Roosevelt. And once again, she takes on a role for FDR as the presidential spouse, where she does things for him that he can't do for himself. In this particular case, traveling to this particular area where this particular WPA project, of course, is taking place. Now, we also can look at support for workers and seniors. Now, we talked about seniors a little bit, and we talked about that FICA and where that FICA, of course, comes from. We talked about Dr. Francis Townsend. When we look at the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, created in 1935, reestablished legal collective bargaining unionization protection, which was lost when the NRA was declared unconstitutional. The Wagner Act created binding arbitration, an increase in union membership, and the use of sit-down strikes, starting with the United Auto Workers strike in General Motors in Flint, Michigan in December of 1936. Now let me go back for a few seconds. The National Recovery Administration was one of those first New Deal programs, and the purpose of it, of course, was to help labor unions and workers, of course, become recognized for the first time, or unions become recognized for the first time. And it was designed, of course, to do what it could about, getting fair wages, an 8-hour workday. And during the first New Deal, it had some success. But because the Supreme Court comes out against it and declares it unconstitutional, Roosevelt has to come up with a plan, of course, to pick up for his shortcomings. And that's where he passes the National Labor Relations Act, which we commonly call the Wagner Act today. The Social Security Act was created to provide pensions for people 65 and older, and a dependent benefit for children. If you were blind, if you were disabled, and if you were a child and dependent, you could, of course, get some type of government pension. Social Security would be funded by payroll taxes, FICA, FICA, and becomes America's first entitlement program. And entitlement programs are those programs that you're entitled to because you're an American citizen and you meet certain qualifications. We would include things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that kind of thing. What we're going to do is have you take about 15, 20 minutes, and we're going to look at this particular bubble map. And what we want you to do is go through and do some research and find 6 different provisions of the Social Security Act of 1935. We'll give you some time to go through and look at that particular entitlement program, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes or so, and we will find out what you found out. Well, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and look at this particular bubble map. And there are a couple things. Once again, we won't go through everything here. We will tell you a couple things that are very important. But what you can do, of course, is if you want to check your answers, you can navigate to the end of the slide presentation, and the answer will be in a key there. But when you look at the Social Security Act of 1935, the greatest provision of it, of course, was the creation of pensions. Social Security would be insurance for American citizens. And the way it becomes insurance for American citizens, if you're 65 years of age, 62 now. So if you're 62, you can take, of course, your retirement in terms of your pension and Social Security to 65 at that time. So when you look at 65, of course, as your, as a pension or a benefit, that's what you get, of course, when you retire, provided you pay, of course, into the system. And there are also, of course, provisions for the blind, provisions for children. So when you go through and look at it, you should be looking at some of those things. And once again, you can navigate to the end of the slide presentation and you can see what those answers would be. That kind of gets us to the lesson focus questions, 3 of which we have to address. Why did FDR create the Second New Deal? What challenges did the Second New Deal face? And what successes did the Second New Deal have? Well, number one, why did FDR create the Second New Deal? The first New Deal didn't do enough to address unemployment. That's what a lot of people thought. If you were mostly Democrats, and then of course the American public were the ones that didn't think it did enough. What challenges did the Second New Deal face? Criticism from Democrats and the Republicans and increased scrutiny from the Supreme Court. And number 3, what successes did the Second New Deal have? Support for unions, the Wagner Act, the creation of Social Security for seniors, the creation of the WPA, which put almost $9 billion to work, and improved American infrastructure. When you look at FDR's New Deal, we told you that, of course, that it comes under a lot of attack. One of the biggest opponents to the New Deal, turns out to be the U.S. Supreme Court. And one of the things that FDR does to try to offset that is that he comes up with the idea of packing the Supreme Court. Since there were 9 members that were currently on the court, what he wanted to do is increase the number of members on the U.S. Supreme Court so he could put people on the court, of course, that would be sympathetic to his New Deal. That doesn't work out, and we'll talk about it a little bit later in terms of why it didn't work out. So, once again, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. Once again, this is America's history, which means it's your history, which means you should do your own research and don't take my word for it. Well, once again, we'll see you next time. And remember, do your own research, make up your own mind.